Namaste, welcome all, and to our viewers through Aurobindo Radio, we all welcome you today, the day 4, and it's going to be Dr. Beloo Mehra's talk. And Dr. Beloo ji is an educator with many years of teaching and research experience in social sciences in India as well as in US. She is the author of newly released book ABCs of Indian National Education and regularly writes a blog inspired by her study of the works of Sri Aurobindo. Also, she writes regularly for several journals and magazines. Her academic background includes degrees in education and economics, and she has extensive research and teaching experience at school and university level in India and US. Dr. Mehra presently works as Senior Academic Mentor at Aurobindo Sri Aurobindo Society and editor of Renaissance. So, we welcome Dr. Beloo ji. Thanks for accepting, and we are very happy to have you because in spite of so many commitments, and she alone is preparing all the gatherings related to 150th year. So she has given time for us. Thanks for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And namaste to everyone present here.
And, So, today is the day 4 of Integral Yoga Week. We have been seeing how Sri Aurobindo prepares us in traditional way as well as integral way of perceiving the knowledge of the secret entity in each of us and to be connected inwardly and also above us. And then what is the alchemy then? And how to make use in the physical body verily? Our heart is the focus, and thus evolved, the soul and nature must do its work and action only with the guidance of inner divinity. The rein of the chariot must be given to the Sarathi, the inner divinity. Thank you. Please enjoy the session.
Namaste once again, and thank you, Umaji, for this kind introduction. And I must thank Umaji and her whole team for inviting me to be part of this celebration, this whole week of celebration of integral yoga as a way to kind of celebrate the 150th birth anniversary of Sri Aurobindo. And I've had the good fortune of listening to at least, I could say, 1.5 talks of the 3 talks that have happened so far. I was fortunate enough to listen to almost entire Malaji's talk, and more than half of Alok Bhai's talk yesterday. Deshpandeji's I have yet to listen. So, and I've been kind of sensing this flow that has been emerging in these sessions. So I hope what I have to share today will also kind of add to that ongoing journey of going into this, what is integral yoga, or what is the larger work of Sri Aurobindo, in which these aspects of integral yoga that we are speaking of. Before I begin, let me also send warm greetings to everyone for this festival day today, Onam. And in fact, as I was coming in the car, I thought that it's very interesting that this talk on appreciating Sri Aurobindo's social philosophy is happening on this day. And I don't want to go into the whole story behind this festival, but the incarnation of Vishnu, the avatar of Vishnu as Trivikrama, is very interesting and fits in with this idea of why or what is the place of Sri Aurobindo's social philosophy in his larger integral vision for the future of humanity. So I pulled out that one aphorism, one statement of Sri Aurobindo, where he actually gives us an inner significance of the 3 strides of Vishnu, the 3 steps that Vishnu takes in that story in the Vaman incarnation. And so Sri Aurobindo says, family, nationality, humanity are Vishnu's three strides from an isolated to a collective unity. The first has been fulfilled, which is the unity of family. We yet strive for the perfection of the second, that is the nationality. Towards the third, humanity, we are reaching out our hands, and the pioneer work is already attempted. So in so many ways, Auroville is also part of that pioneer work for that human unity. But there is another fourth stride of Vishnu, which is what Sri Aurobindo speaks of, which is the superhumanity, the new race, the divinized humanity. This is very important to keep that at the back of our mind, that fourth stride, because what Sri Aurobindo gives in his vision of, or in his social philosophy, or in his vision for future society, is a spiritualized society. And so I thought I'll just kind of try to situate the whole of his social philosophy book. I mean, there are actually many, almost every work of Sri Aurobindo, you'll find insights into his vision for the future society. But the main book, which is the human cycle, I'll try to kind of situate that in the context of his larger work and bring out few insights from the book which could be relevant, and then we'll see what comes up and if there is any time for discussion. So just like these three strides of Vishnu, family, nationality, humanity, and then the fourth one, the Param Padam, as Sri Aurobindo speaks of in one of his Vedic writings, which is the superhumanity. I was also reminded, while I was thinking of this aphorism, the three adjectives or the three descriptors Sri Aurobindo's lawyer during the Alipur bomb trial had used to describe him: poet of patriotism, prophet of nationalism, and lover of humanity. And if you read some other writings of Naulinida, he speaks that this description becomes complete if you add another fourth one, which is the bringer of a divine life. So he's again, that fourth stride is made kind of like, it has been made more obvious for us to remember that. So nationality, family, nationality, humanity, prophet of nationalism, lover of humanity, and then going beyond humanity to a divinized humanity, where the society will be divinized. So it's just very interesting, this parallel. And the reason I also bring up this particular description given by C.R. Das during Alipur bomb trial is because if we look closely at Sri Aurobindo's political work from 1901 or even from 1893 onwards, the day he landed, or especially from 1905 to 1910, particularly again after being released from the prison, so 1909 to 1910, he was keenly aware of the nation-building work. For him, all political revolutionary work was important because it was necessary to build a future nation. So he was already thinking of the future. And at the same time, he was also keenly aware that this future India that has to be built is not only for sake of India alone, but for the future of humanity. So his vision for a future society began right from his understanding of why it was so important that India should become free. So from that moment onwards, that's why in a lot of his political speeches and a lot of his writings in Karma Yogin, you will find insights into his social vision. But as we know, kind of like, more officially, he started penning down and putting down his what you can call as his metaphysical statements of his own spiritual experience and spiritual realizations in the journal called Arya from 1914 onwards, after he came to Pondicherry in 1910. And the specific chapters that became part of a series called Psychology of Human Development, which later on becomes the book, The Human Cycle, those were written from 1916 to 1918, around that phase. So more than a little 1.5 years or so. Actually almost 2 years. And in one of his essays later on, Sri Aurobindo speaks of what those series of essays that he titled as Psychology of Human Development, what was his objective in writing that? And I thought I'll just share that one sentence from his. He said this at the start of the 4th year of Arya's publication. So that would be 1917, 1914, 15, 16, 17. So in that essay he writes very clearly, in the psychology of social development, sorry, I've been saying human development, but probably as I go along, it will become clear why I have been thinking of human development, because social development, human development, individual development, they are all kind of connected in his vision. Very close identity of nature between the two. So in the psychology of social development, that series of essays, we have indicated how these truths, what are the truths that he's talking about? The truths of individual self-development, because that's what he refers to in the previous one, how these truths of individual self-development affect the evolution of human society. So while he is concerned about the evolution of human society or the future of human society, he's also making it very clear in 1917 in itself that whatever philosophy I have described in the essays that come under the life divine or the synthesis of yoga about individual self-development, the essential truth of that, the essential principles of individual self-development can be applied and are actually also the basis of a true development of the society. So this identity of nature between individual and society is very significant in Sri Aurobindo's social vision. So in the Indian cultural tradition, we have two terms, Vyashti and Samashti, for individual and collective. And it has been said that they are, both the individual and the collectivity are two different manifestations of the same spirit, the same Brahman. And Sri Aurobindo describes that beautifully in a couple of very interesting passages in Life Divine, and if I have time, I'll like to read those passages. I've pulled those out. But just to kind of round off this part of my presentation about the significance of his social philosophy. And then later on in the series of essays that became the book, The Ideal of Human Unity, which can be sort of understood as a compendium to the human cycle. When you go and buy today, Complete Works of Sri Aurobindo, Volume 25, 3 books come together in one binding, The Human Cycle, The Ideal of Human Unity, and War and Self-Determination. Both are, all 3 are very interesting to read, but they also go in, especially Human Cycle and Ideal of Human Unity, have a very specific focus also. Ideal of Human Unity can be understood more as his philosophical statement of what will lead to the unity of humanity. So his vision for the united humanity, and also a very deep inner look at the world history. What has been happening so far, the formation of nation, the formation of nation state, and what are the conditions that will lead to the human unity. So I don't think I'll touch that part today. But in one chapter that now comes under the collection of essays and Ideal of Human Unity, Sri Aurobindo has a very, very telling paragraph which actually can summarize what is the significance of Sri Aurobindo's social philosophy. So as I was kind of pulling out some things for the talk today, I thought, why not share his words rather than putting my interpretation on that. And if you look at that complete works, volume 25, this will be on page 279 and 280. So let me read that paragraph, and I'll go a little slow so we can all appreciate the depth of his argument. Before I do that, also let me add one other thing as a prequel to that. You see, various spiritual seers and sages, and especially in the Indian tradition, we've had a lot of people speaking of or giving their teachings of and expressing their spiritual realization in metaphysical statements. So we have commentaries of various gurus and acharyas on not only on the scriptures, but their expression of their own spiritual realization. But most of these statements, if you will, have been focused on individual alone. How can individual evolve and experience, walk on a certain path of yoga or sadhana or self-development, inner self-development, and come to that spiritual experience or that spiritual realization? Most of our traditional gurus and seers and sages have not been concerned about society. The goal has always been individual liberation or individual release from the whatever you want to call it, mohamaya, or from the world of bondage, or from the earthly life. Sri Aurobindo comes and tells us that that is half the truth. The other half is that not only the individual's release is important, but that is the starting point. And the individual who is liberated has to come back and work in the collective, so that collective can gradually transform and a descent of that supernal light can happen, so the earthly life can become life divine. So this is essentially his argument. So what is really interesting is that in Sri Aurobindo you don't find that what others had omitted, which is the focus on society, the focus on collective. And this paragraph actually gives a very interesting statement to that. He says, nothing is more obscure to humanity or less seized by its understanding, whether in the power that moves it or the sense of the aim towards which it moves, than its own communal and collective life. So this is the part that is most obscure to humanity. What is my collective life? And what is my place in this collective life? And then, this is the interesting part. He says, sociology does not help us, for it only gives us the general story of the past and the external conditions under which communities have survived. So now his kind of, what I could call it as a spiritual critique of the various disciplines of academia begins. Sociology does not help us because it only looks at the general story of the past and external conditions. History teaches us nothing. I love that statement. History teaches us nothing. Why? It is a confused torrent of events and personalities, or a kaleidoscope of changing institutions. I remember in my history class studying the whole list of Mughal emperors one by one, and their date of birth and date of death, and when did they become the Badshah, and when they conquered this. Why? I don't even remember that chronology. What is the use of that? So history teaches us nothing. It's a confused torrent of events, personalities, or a kaleidoscope of changing institutions. We do not seize the real sense of all this change and this continual streaming forward of human life in the channels of time. What we do seize are current or recurrent phenomena, facile generalizations, partial ideas. We talk of democracy, aristocracy, and autocracy, collectivism and individualism, imperialism and nationalism. All these were topics that I wrote essays on in my 2 years of economics in high school and then 5 years of economics in BA and MA. We talk of all these, the state, commune, capitalism, and labor. We advance hasty generalizations and make absolute systems which are positively announced today only to be abandoned perforce tomorrow. Democracy was good, democracy is no longer good. Capitalism was good, capitalism is no longer good. We espouse causes and ardent enthusiasm whose triumph turns to an early disillusionment, and then forsake them for others, perhaps for those that we have taken so much trouble to destroy. So at one time, we swore by socialism, but now socialism is a burden. So we try to destroy, and then again, we fall in love back again with that same ideal. For a whole century, mankind thirsts and battles after liberty and earns it with a bitter expense of toil, tears, and blood. The century that enjoys without having fought for it. Those who never fought for the ideal of liberty, they turn away from it as if it's a puerile illusion, and they are ready to renounce the depreciated gain as the price of some new good. And all this happens because our whole thought and action with regard to our collective life is shallow and empirical. This is an important word, empirical. We only look at, we only use what social scientists call as the positivist empiricist method. What is happening on the surface? It does not seek for, it does not base itself on a firm, profound, and complete knowledge. And then this is the last part, very important. The moral is not the vanity of human life. Just because we don't understand it does not mean that human life, individual as well as collective, is vain, and we shouldn't be concerned about it. The moral is not the vanity of human life, of its ardors and enthusiasms, or of the ideals it pursues. They are all important. The ideal of democracy has its truth. The ideal of socialism, the ideal of communism has its truth. But there is a need for the necessity is of a wiser, larger, more patient search after its true aim, true law and aim. That is, after the true law and the true aim of human life. So in this one paragraph, he gives us what he has been writing about in his, when he is expounding on his social philosophy. That what he gives us is not only, while he is not saying that the outer phenomena is less important or is not worthy of our attention, but what is really needed is to go beyond the phenomenon or go beneath or deeper into the phenomenon to understand the essential law, the essential nature, the essential purpose or the essential goal towards which the human life is progressing, both individually and collectively. And that is what I believe is the main reason why we should really spend time looking at Sri Aurobindo's social philosophy, spending time reading. This was one of the there were two books of Sri Aurobindo that I read back to back few times when I started my deep journey into works of Sri Aurobindo. One was volume 20, which is the Foundations of Indian Culture, but retitled as The Renaissance in India and other essays on Indian culture. And the other one was Human Cycle. And if you were to look at this book today, You'll see notes in at least 3-4 different colors, because every time I would use just a different color to remember. And today I can't even make out my bad handwriting, what those notes are all about. But it's really a book that one should approach it with sort of the same reverence that we have for his other works on yoga and sadhana, which we know are important for our journey into our individual sadhana. But you'll be surprised when you flip through the pages how many deep yogic insights you have in a book on so-called social philosophy. The reason is because he is constantly giving us the picture of the essential truth of human collective life. And we are all, in fact, right from the Vedic vision, the collective life of human, or the collective aspect of human experience has been emphasized in the very vision of Purush Sukta itself, right? So when you have the four, the Brahman, the Kshatriya, the Vaishya, the Shudra, these are the 4 soul forces or the 4 soul types. The idea has always been that, all these 4 together are part of that one Purusha, that one Brahman. All these 4 soul forces that are then reflected in the 4 psychological temperaments that then go into what Malaji was talking about, the Swabhava and the Swadharma, and then they go into the Varanashrama system. All that is part of the Vedic vision. And then in the Veda, we always also have the beautiful prayer in, I think, the last book of the Rig Veda of, Sam Gachadvam, Sam Vadhadvam, that together we may prosper, together we may walk in harmony, we may walk in unity. So the collective side of human experience has always been emphasized in that sense, but somehow in the more metaphysical, intellectual expressions, it had been ignored, except from the Veda, what we see. So why is that social philosophy of, or what I could call it as a spiritual social philosophy, not given as much, if I could use the word weightage, or not read or appreciated as much? That's why when Umaji asked me the title of this talk, I said use the word appreciating, because there is a need to appreciate the significance of this. Why it does not get as much appreciation as, say, the works that are more focused on individual sadhana or the individual yoga? There again, we don't have to look anywhere else. Sri Aurobindo himself gives the answer. So, and that answer I will, again, it is coming from the same book, The Human Cycle. There's one paragraph which actually gives us why we don't remember to appreciate. It's not that it's not important, but we forget because we are focused on that individual liberation, that individual release. Because in his own philosophy, it's not that social perfection is not important. He's concerned, that's why he wrote all these essays, deliberately wrote, and he explicitly stated that. And yet he also states, this is why I think we all love reading Sri Aurobindo, because there is always an and. There is no this or that, there is always an and. So Sri Aurobindo also says that individual perfection, if humanity is seeking perfect society, the key lies in individual perfection. Which is why we keep coming back to, unless an individual evolves, society will not evolve. So this is the paragraph from page, this is actually one of his last chapters in The Human Cycle, Conditions for Coming of a Spiritual Age. And there he writes, the spirit in humanity discovers, develops, builds its formations first in the individual man. So as I said a little while ago that, right, in Indian tradition itself, we see that Vyashti and Samashti as 2 expressions or 2 manifestations of the same one spirit. Sri Aurobindo also speaks of that. In fact, there is a long passage in Life Divine where he speaks of this, how there is a truth or reality with the capital R, not the phenomenal reality, but the essential reality. There is a truth or reality behind society, behind the collective, and there is the same truth behind the individual. If I have time, I'll read that paragraph also. Because there is this essential identity of nature between individual and society. This is where the significance of individual perfection becomes important. The spirit in humanity discovers, develops, builds its formations first in the individual man. It is through the progressive and formative individual that it offers the discovery and the chance of a new self-creation to the mind of the race. So individual is the key for the new creation to happen. Why? Why individual is so significant? For the communal mind holds things subconsciously at first. So this is again another key insight that we must hold on to when appreciating Sri Aurobindo's social philosophy is what I think Malaji also referred to in her talk, and I'm sure it came up in Deshpandeji's talk as well, about the evolution and the involution. So the communal mind holds the essential truth first in a very subconscious way. If consciously, then in a confused, chaotic manner. It is only through the individual mind that the mass can arrive at a clear knowledge and creation of the thing it held in its subconscious self. So if we remember, go back to the Vedic cosmological vision, which I think you also referred to, the involutionary process, the spirit, the Brahman, the Purusha, or what Sri Aurobindo says in his book, The Mother, the holocaust of the Divine Mother herself, plunges herself into the inconscient. If that's the involutionary journey and the evolution is happening as a, from sort of like from inconscient, subconscious to matter, life, mind, from the mind becomes a collective, society. If this is the evolutionary journey, then the society also evolves from the same subconscious to a more rational stage of society. But it is slow. That evolution process is very, very slow. It's a very confused, chaotic manner. It is only through the individual mind that the mass can arrive at a clear knowledge. And then he says, thinkers, historians, sociologists who belittle the individual and would like to lose him in the mass or think of him chiefly as a cell or as an atom have got hold only of the obscurer side of the truth of nature's workings in humanity. Very important that an individual is not just a cell or an atom to be lost in the collective. Why Sri Aurobindo, while giving his social philosophy, giving so much significance to the individual, he answers that also. He says it is because man is not like other manifestations that nature has put forth. Not like any other material formations of nature, matter or life, or like the animal. When the life came from matter to life, the animal, the plant, and then the animal came. Man is not like the animal either. But because nature intends in him a more and more conscious evolution. This is where the significance of the individual is so important. Because only man, the human individual, is capable of a conscious evolution. That is the nature's intention in the individual. That is why the individuality is so much developed in him and so absolutely important and indispensable. He could have just written so important, but he adds the adjective absolutely important and indispensable. Very interesting choice of his, this thing. Few years back, I was invited at Pondicherry University to speak on the human cycle, and the topic that the professor there came up with, it was his understanding of Sri Aurobindo's social philosophy. And he said that he had, or some colleague of his, they had done some small survey in Pondicherry and around area, and they found that before these essays were written in psychology of social development, there wasn't much academic writing coming from India that could be considered as a sociological writing. So he said that in that way, Pondicherry has the unique, I haven't verified that research, so I can't really absolutely say this with absolute certainty, but he said that for him, Sri Aurobindo is a pioneering social thinker. So that's what he said. I'll give the title to your talk, Sri Aurobindo, the pioneering social thinker. So as I thought about what I'll share with the students and other faculty in his department, I thought of that, even Sri Aurobindo's writings on Indian culture or Indian society have great insights into the present state of society, the past state of society, particularly Indian society, and the future where humanity or human society is evolving, and what should be the role of India or Indian society, Indian collective in this forward march of humanity. So when we read something like what I've just shared, that individuality is so much developed in man and so absolutely and indispensable. When we appreciate this significance that he gives to individual self-development and individual self-perfection in his social vision, I'm also reminded of another wonderful passage. It's a letter of Sri Aurobindo to one of his disciples where he spoke about that at a certain time in India, the individual's freedom was always sacrificed at the altar of family, community, or clan. That is also a truth that we cannot hide. So when I went to talk at Pondicherry University, I just spoke maybe for half the time about this book, and then I also wanted to bring other examples to show why Sri Aurobindo can be considered as one of the, if not one of the, at least as per this professor, the pioneering Indian sociological thinker. And I understood that word pioneering in the sense that his explanation of sociology is also in the light of Indian cultural tradition, the Indian spiritual truths. That is what makes us I could write sociology totally from a Marxist perspective. That is not going to help. That is not going to be the indigenous or the Indian vision of understanding of human collective life. So I took certain examples like that as to what Sri Aurobindo had to say about Chaturvarna, its corruption, its degradation. So, again, when we say on appreciating social philosophy of Sri Aurobindo, yes, even though today I might be focusing more on the human cycle, but there are so many insights scattered everywhere, including Savitri. The whole description of the inadequacy of reason that you find in Savitri, in Kingdoms of, in the book 2, Ashwapati's Yoga, the Kingdom of Little Life or something like that. The inadequacy of life, the inadequacy of mind. You'll find so many descriptions of how reason fails to bring us together to a collective, a beautiful, perfect collective life. So anyway, where was I? Yeah, the individuality being so important. And then he says, no doubt what comes out in the individual and afterwards moves the mass must have been there already in the universal mind. This is again where I think I'll refer back to Malaji's description of involution and evolution. Whatever is coming out in the individual mind, any new idea, it must have been there in the universal mind, because the truth has already been submerged through the process of involution already, and now everything is coming out as a manifestation, as an expression of that. And the individual is only an instrument for its manifestation, discovery, development, but he is an indispensable instrument, and an instrument not merely of subconscient nature, not merely of an instinctive urge that moves the mass, but more directly of the spirit of whom that nature is itself the instrument and matrix of its creations. So all great changes therefore find their first clear and effective power and their direct shaping force in the mind and spirit of an individual or a limited number of individuals. I'll come to this point just in a minute. An individual or a limited number of individuals, because this is what he also speaks of as conditions for the future of society. I'll just come to that. The mass follows, but unfortunately in a very imperfect and confused fashion, which often or even usually ends in the failure or distortion of the thing created. So this is the significance Sri Aurobindo places on individual evolutionary march, on individual self-development, on individuals' own progress, inner progress. And this is also an interesting, it could be an interesting diversion into something very important that you find in human cycle. I'm sure many of you here probably have already read through the chapters. So there are different stages that Sri Aurobindo speaks of in a social evolution. And he gives us kind of like two ways to understand that evolutionary march. In the first half of the book, in the first 6, 7, 8 chapters, he speaks of 5 stages through which a society evolves. And the names he took from a German writer at the time, Karl Lemprecht. But in the second half of the book, he switches and he uses a 3-term classification of the 3 stages. So the first 5 stages are symbolic, typal, conventional, individualistic, or the age of reason. He uses both terms. And from individualistic, subjective, and then spiritual. So we have symbolic, typal, conventional, individualistic leading to subjective, and then subjective. These are the 5 stages. And subjective will eventually lead to the spiritual, the future society, a spiritualized society. But then in the later half of the book, or probably from the, I would say, the 2/3 of the book onwards, he switches terms and he uses 3 terms: infrarational, rational, and suprarational. So infrarational would be that stage of society or that stage of individual development when we are moved primarily by our instincts, impulses, our customary responses to desires, necessities, whatever comes up, whatever moves in us. Rational would be the stage when the human reason has been developed to that extent, when reason can be the arbiter, whether this is to be done, whether this is not to be done. This is where I think Alokji's talk yesterday on, from the part that I heard, his focus on the intelligent will, the yoga of the intelligent will, the yoga of the Buddhi Yoga from Bhagavad Gita, the discernment, the Vivek Shakti, all that development has to be part of this development of this reason, the age of reason, the age of rationality. And then comes a point where reason itself will tell you, the discernment itself, mind has evolved to that point where it will tell you that if you want to move further, mind cannot be the instrument. You have to look for other faculties, other instruments. So that's where the supra-rational begins, which in his first classification would be from the changeover from individualism to subjectivism. There are several other topics Sri Aurobindo speaks of, the difference between aesthetic culture and ethical culture, which is again a delightful chapter to read. And those of you who are interested in arts should definitely spend time on that. Again, you'll see the difference between, Sri Aurobindo integrates the best of the East and best of the West. And you'll find when you read through that chapter, the whole history of sort of like, Western history of how the diversion happened between seeking of beauty, search for beauty, the aesthetic search for beauty, and the search for the good, which is the ethical search. How a conflict happened between the two, which was not there in the Indian tradition. But Sri Aurobindo speaks about that as well in this book. So this little book is like a gem for, bringing many, many, many things. So because we don't have the time to go into all these 4 or 5 stages, but we should appreciate this fact that this part about individualism is very significant when he's describing these 5 stages, which is that every society has to go through what he also calls it as an age of revolt, the questioning. All this is part of the individualistic stage, because before individualism is a conventional stage of society where all the truths, all the great truths that had been there have lost their hold, have lost their power, lost their force, and only the shell remains. Sri Aurobindo uses a beautiful description: dress becomes more important than the person. So we are only, this is how my family used to do. This is how my ancestors used to do. So I have to continue following that tradition. But then a new person comes in the family, a child grows up, child becomes teenager, a child becomes a rebel. And that's where the questioning starts. Why should I do this? Just because my mom says so? No. That's the age of revolt, which brings in the age of individualism. It's all coming from mind. And mind is gradually being developed, age of reason, perfectly, everything is going on. But then comes a point where, again, Sri Aurobindo describes, if this age of individualism, if this age of reason, the rational age, is allowed to continue its journey without anything else coming in the picture, it will come into that same cycle that I just read about. It will either come up with a system called democracy, socialism, autocracy. Oh, autocracy is bad, let's go back to democracy. Democracy is bad, let's go back to capitalism. Either this cycle will continue, or people will start what we are seeing in the world today: occupy this, occupy that, question this institution, question that institution. Everything is up, and some kind of an anarchy will take over. In Sri Aurobindo's social philosophy, I should also add, anarchy is not a bad word, but he adds another adjective to it. He says the future might have that spiritual anarchy. It's the spiritual anarchy that we may be seeking, not a rational, individualistic, materialistic anarchy which says my way or no other way, which is very disturbing, because the truth of the collective then gets disturbed. If the collective is also just as much Brahman as the individual is, an individual cannot walk out of the collective and destroy the collective. At the same time, the collective, the society, the nation has no right to destroy the freedom of the individual. And Sri Aurobindo speaks about that as well, that whatever allows individual to flower, to blossom, to develop in his or her own freedom is right for him or her. But then he always also adds this thing. What is that but? That individual has to also find out what is this self that he or she is trying to develop. It cannot be only the ego self. Because one thing that reason has given us, and he describes this beautifully in his, he had like 3-4 chapters dedicated to the whole curve of the age of reason. What he describes that 2 things that reason, higher reason has given us is that an individual is not complete by himself. He is or she is part of a collective, and also this self is not the ego self alone. There is something beyond, behind this ego self, which is where individualistic search for perfection, happiness, liberation, the reason we are all here in a way, if we really were to be very honest with ourselves, we are seeking that individual perfection. The reason we are here, if this is true, then from individualism, the movement is naturally going towards subjectivism, the deeper truth. Subjective age, Sri Aurobindo says, is the precondition for any possibility of a spiritualized society. So what I see on the surface is not complete, not the full truth. There is a deeper truth. So that's an inward turn, which Alokji was emphasizing yesterday also, that from the outward and downward, the gaze has to be turned inward and upward. That is the beginning of from individual to subjective, which will eventually lead us to the spiritual or the supra-rational. This is the journey Sri Aurobindo describes. So evolution, the great revolutionary from his political days to the great evolutionary, he's completed that whole journey from, Bande Mataram, or before that even from Indu Prakash to his, ideal of human unity and human cycle. And I'm not even counting all the, life divine and synthesis of yoga there. So this is, I don't know how much time I have. Should I? Oh, okay. I don't know. Is everybody feeling okay? Should we? Should I continue or? Okay. So let's see. So I think I've covered many things that I thought I will. These are just some notes from here and there that I gathered and some quotes. So one other thing that I think I probably mentioned just in passing earlier, which we could probably spend a little time to go a little deeper, is to the similarities and differences between his explanation of individual and society. So as he says in his Life Divine also, actually, let me read that part, which will then go a little deeper into. So this essential reality that Sri Aurobindo's yes, he's a pioneering sociological thinker, but he's not a sociological thinker like your standard sociological thinkers looking only at the outer phenomena. He's always concerned about the essential truth, the essential reality. And in his Life Divine, actually, the chapter that is titled The Divine Life, there is a very telling paragraph, which is another beautiful description of his future. Malaji was concerned about future psychology. Here we are concerned about the future society, the future of sociology even as a discipline. I think we can get insights from here onto what should be the future of this academic discipline of sociology. He says, so there is a reality, a truth of all existence, which is greater and more abiding than all its formations and manifestations. To find that truth and reality and to live in it, achieve the most perfect manifestation and formation possible of it, must be the secret of perfection, whether of the individual or communal being. So let me take a pause here and speak about this communal being thing, which is another very important aspect that I forgot to mention earlier in going over the contents of human cycle. So there is a truth of the individual, there is a truth of the community or the collective. But this truth, which Sri Aurobindo says is the soul, the group soul of the community, is not some kind of like an, amorphous, just loosely thing, here and there, some abstract idea. Sri Aurobindo says it is a conscious being. And yet it is hidden in the collective. It has to be discovered. And we are sitting here in Auroville, where Mother was very clear on saying that each collective that comes up, each nation group that is represented here has to work to find its nation soul. That is why we have the pavilions, right? In the international zone, the Bharat Nivas, Tibet Nivas, this Nivas, that Tibet House, sorry, that each collective that is represented here in Auroville has to find its own soul, which indicates that because there is a group soul or a nation soul, this idea he develops further in ideal of human unity, is also unique to that collective. If you go back to what I started with, the 3 strides of Vishnu, family, nationality, humanity, just because we are moving towards humanity does not mean that we will no longer require nationality or no longer require the diversities within humanity. This is another very important aspect of Sri Aurobindo's social vision, that because reality is one does not mean it is one monotonous, colorless thing. There are various shades, various diversities within, and each diversity is, the truth of each diversity is in the group soul of that collective. And India, Sri Aurobindo, as one place says, is the Mother Shakti, the Bhavani Bharati, he called her Bhavani Bharati, he called her Bharat Shakti. He gave these 2 names to the truth of India's nation soul, and each nation has to find its own soul. So this idea that just because we are moving toward human unity, we do not need nation. In fact, Sri Aurobindo also says this in Human Cycle when he describes what I was just referring to earlier, individualism and subjectivism. When nations or societies go from individualistic to a subjective age, to a more subjective search, that is the same search as nation trying to find its soul. So in maybe what we are seeing today, see, the thing about understanding social philosophy is that you have to see whether it helps us understand what is happening in the society and in the country today or in the world today. Not only in India, but in many parts of the world, if you look around and if you look a little beneath the phenomena, there is a seeking for the truth of that nationality that is happening. There is what we or what CNN would ordinarily or BBC would ordinarily speak of as a new nationalism that has been taking over the world. Beneath the outer phenomenon might be a seeking of the subjective truth of that collective. Because we have just now seen the mass moves in chaotic, confused fashion, so it looks a little chaotic. It looks like, they are reverting back to the so-called mythic golden age or the golden past, which never existed, this and that. The movement is towards the future. Yes, the movement is towards the future, but it is the past that has brought us to this point, and this present is going to shape the future. So the essential truth of the past cannot be ignored either. So this continuity is also important. In the evolutionary, the spiral, that evolution, there is an upward march, but there is also a cyclical path that is happening together. So these are other things that Sri Aurobindo speaks of. In fact, in his chapter on subjectivism, he speaks of true and false subjectivism. And those of you who've already read the Human Cycle, remember he was writing this in 1916 to 1918. And the example that he gives of false subjectivism, sometimes this search for finding what is the true Indian soul, it can lead you in wrong directions. And he gives the example, India was still a colony at the time of the British Empire. But the example that he gives is very telling. He gives the example of German seeking for its own group self, which led to a disaster, what we know as Nazism. That is a very lower, vital, ego-driven subjectivism. So he cautions against that as well. So an inward search can lead us into dangerous directions, which is why, if you remember what Alokji said, inward and upward. The spirit becomes so important. the higher force towards which all this inner seeking has to be offered. So this is not a search of the mind alone. Mind can be an aid off and on. That discernment can be, as I think I heard this part of Alokji's talk, the study of scriptures can be helpful, but it can only lead us to a certain point. Then the search has to go within. So all this is very much, part of his larger social vision as well. So anyway, I hope that makes sense, that diversion a little bit. So coming back to this reality that is behind every human and everything. So the reality, he says, is there within each thing and gives to each of its formations its power of being and the value of being. The universe is a manifestation of reality. Now here is the hierarchy that he's talking about. So the universe, reality, let's call it Brahman, spirit, whatever. The universe is a manifestation of the reality, and there is a truth of the universal existence. A power of cosmic being, that Purusha, the Purush Sukta from which the Vedas, the Rig Vedic Purush Sukta comes, an all self or world spirit. After universe, he says, humanity is a formation or manifestation of the reality in the universe, and there is a truth and self, that is the conscious being of humanity, a human spirit with its own destiny of human life. Then the gradation comes down a little bit. The community is a formation of the reality. See, he's here writing this in Life Divine, and the chapter is titled The Divine Life, and he's giving us this beautiful description of how everything is manifestation of that same reality. So from universe to humanity to community. The community is a formation of a reality, a manifestation of the spirit in man, and there is a truth, a self, a power of the collective being. Very applicable to, especially to a place like Aurobindo. Then from the community he comes down. The individual is a formation of the reality, and there is a truth of the individual, an individual self, soul or spirit that expresses itself through the individual mind, life and body, and can express itself too in something that goes beyond life, mind and body. This is where the difference begins to come through. So everything is similar so far, but the individual has something more. And that again he explains in Life Divine. As I said, his social philosophy is not exclusive to just one book. What is different, and this brings us back to the point with which we started, why individual is so significant. What is different about individual is, the individual, however, is not confined within the community. Although his mind and life are, in a way, part of the communal mind and life, but there is something in him that can go beyond them. I was reading one of Aurobindo's essays on education 2 days back for some other project that I'm working on, and there he speaks of that some seeds need, the kind of soil, the kind of environment seeds need to sprout, and some seeds, some individuals need a soil, a ground, an environment that is different from the one in which they were born. And I thought, okay, this is such a perfect way to explain why people move away from their hometowns. Because something in them for their own development takes us beyond to that, beyond their own limited family, their own limited surroundings. So this is again, because there is that essential truth of the individual. There is something in the individual that can go beyond them. The community exists by the individual, that is for sure, for its mind, life and body are constituted by the mind, life and body of its composing individuals. If that were abolished or disgraded, its own existence would be abolished. The community would be abolished if the mind, life and body of individuals are if the individuals are abolished. But the individual is not a mere cell of the collective existence. He would not cease to exist if separated or expelled from the collective mass? Okay, so I lived for many years in the West, and one question that is often asked of the NRIs is why, especially in the US, why are Indians able to flourish so well in countries like the US or things like that? And there are many, many sociological outer phenomena, reasons that can be given. In fact, my whole PhD research was on the Indian immigrant experience, but all that was the outer sociology. You see, I had to come to Sri Aurobindo to understand the deeper inner meaning behind that. But that time I had not studied him this closely. So the point is that an individual can continue to flourish even when expelled or out of personal choice has removed himself and planted himself into another environment. Because it's that individual's path of self-development, right, that is taking beyond that. He would not cease to exist if separated or expelled from the collective mass. For the collectivity, the community is not even the whole of humanity, and it is not the world. The individual can exist and find himself elsewhere in humanity or by himself in the world. So a community is not the whole world. If an individual removes himself from one community, he or she can flourish in another community. Why? Because that community, there is a larger humanity. So he can continue to flourish by even in other communities or even by himself in the world. If the community has a life dominating that of the individuals, still it will not constitute the individual's whole life. An individual is not tied to, I'm just kind of paraphrasing it a little bit because it goes a little longer. The individual is not tied to the community's tying of the life of the individuals. Individual can affirm himself in another communal life, or if he is strong enough, in a nomad existence, not binding himself to any community, or in an eremite solitude where if he cannot pursue or achieve a complete material living, he can spiritually exist and find his own reality and indwelling self or being. This is his explanation of the ancient Indian Varanashrama system in which the ashrama of sannyas was there. What is the individual doing here? He's finding his or her complete satisfaction in a nomadic existence, the sannyas ashram, where he's not even pursuing the material goals related to material living, but goals related to a spiritual living. And in that letter that I referred to of Sri Aurobindo, where he said that traditionally Indian communal life has always been binding on individuals' freedom, he said the only escape door was when the individual wanted to become a sannyasi or a Vaishnav, the nomadic existence as a Vaishnava saint or as, a sadhu, wander around. And there also he adds another important dimension. He said, but for this also was limited primarily to men, not to women, except after the advent of Buddha, when Buddhist monasteries came forward, or the Vaishnava bhakti religion, when the women saints started coming. But they were also, if we appreciate Sri Aurobindo's entire integral vision, they were also escaping in some way. They were only seeking their own individual liberation. Right? So Sri Aurobindo says that yes, that is the truth, but that is only half the truth. They were not necessarily coming back and working toward the collective transformation, which is part of the integral yoga. So his vision is collective, not just individual transformation. Individual liberation is the starting point leading to the individual transformation, but his vision also includes our concern with collective transformation. And yet at the same time, he helps us appreciate why these, from ancient times, these systems existed. Because otherwise, the society was still very much in those customary, conventional, typal ages. As especially as Indians, we can appreciate a lot of this, families telling, oh, don't do this. There is this, what I understand as sort of like a corruption or a degradation of a sense of dharma, the patni dharma, the matri dharma, the this dharma. Sometimes they can also become prisons, especially for women. So Sri Aurobindo was very, very aware, sitting in his room in the ashram, he was, and that letter is like late 1930s or 40s, the one that I'm speaking of. I might have a copy of that letter here. So he was very aware of these things. So this is another thing that I wanted to emphasize, that yes, there is a difference, there is a similarity, or not just a similarity, but an essential identity between individual and society, that both have their essential truths, both are evolving, both have this one goal of transformation. That is the goal behind the existence, the progressive unfolding of the divine's truth in the creation. That is the basis of Sri Aurobindo's philosophy, right? That there is no, it's not just a random Maya kind of thing that we are seeing or, that we are part of. There is a progressively gradual unfolding of the truth behind all the chaos, behind all the confusions. Same is true with society. And yet there is this difference, that an individual is still capable of existing outside of the collective. So the freedom that is so important for an individual self-development, Sri Aurobindo says in one of his last chapters in Human Cycle, the two things that are essential for the coming of future spiritual society is freedom and harmony. And the two things, some individuals, a group of individuals who are open to bringing of the new supernal truth, and some readiness in the communal mind for these truths. So in some ways, what we are all a part of today, what we are all doing today, by studying the works of Sri Aurobindo, by, in Indian tradition, we have an emphasis on Shravana, listening to the words of the sages and spiritual masters. We are preparing the communal mind to receive the truths. And so that the individuals whom Sri Aurobindo says are the pioneers of bringing that future spiritual age, that, those who are leading the march, when they share with us, we are ready. So if Sri Aurobindo and the mother have been pioneers and, the harbingers of this new age, the new creation, from 1956, since the descent of supramental consciousness, by studying their works, by dedicating our lives to study of their works, by making their truths part of our living truths, not just studying them intellectually, but by walking the path to whatever extent possible. One drop of practice, Mother says, is more important than the ocean of teachings and the code that we have in ashram dining room. We are preparing the communal body, the communal mind, so that that future spiritual age can come forth. So I think that with that I will close. Like I said, I could go on and on, but let me take a pause here and see if there are any questions or discussions. And there's one little thing that I would just add. I think Umaji mentioned about the book, Indian National Education. Actually, I have a much more recent book, which is not on education, though the new book also has an essay. That was my most recent book, is an attempt of mine to apply Sri Aurobindo's social philosophy. See, I have been trained in economics and education, so my first approach to Sri Aurobindo's work was through my own academic training as in social sciences and in applied social sciences like education. So his social thought, his educational thought, and his cultural writings were my first way to come in. And then I realized that, of course, I can't understand all this without appreciating or spending time with Life Divine or Synthesis or Savitri. Everything is like part of that one. All knowledge is one. The integral, the completeness of the knowledge only comes forth. But anyway, in my writings primarily, I feel more at home when I'm writing on these areas that I've been trained in also. That's problem of the mind, right? Unless it goes. So the book was called Understanding Contemporary India in the Light of Sri Aurobindo. And most of the essays were inspired by my own readings of Human Cycle and his educational thought. But, if there are any questions about understanding contemporary Indian society, it's like, huge topic. So I only picked out few, like, gender equality or education or the commercial nature or the, interreligious harmony and things like that. So I picked out 3-4 topics, and that's what this is about. So if there are any questions about the contemporary topics also, since, as you said, it is really an applied way to, that would be the best way to understand his social vision. So I'll be happy to address that as well. Okay, thank you. Thank you for your patient listening.
Some appreciation, comment.
Dev Smitaji, I think.
I just want to know what is your view of the content model in India and how the individuals which are now more rational in their ways, growing towards the spirituality, because now has become quite a bit of materialistic. So how this can come back to the spirituality? How do you see?
Okay. Yeah. Hello, how are you, Devin? Did you have a question? Oh, okay, I see. Okay. So yes, there is I think in one of his writings, either in Karmyogin or in another essay, where Sri Aurobindo writes that God always keeps for himself a chosen country in which all the higher knowledge stays hidden. And then he adds, in this Chatur Yuga at least, this is amazing. The words that he uses, in this Chatur Yuga at least, he's not saying that this is all, the time is just this. There were other yugas also, Chatur Yugas before the cycles. In this Chatur Yuga at least, that country is India. So, and then if you read this further, he says that these higher truths, God hides them. These higher truths go behind the screen, as if behind the curtain, when a wave of materialism takes over, only to be revealed when it's sort of like, in Hindi we say, ati ho jati hai, when the things become so extreme, so that knowledge gets hidden so that it won't be destroyed, it won't be corrupted, which is one way to also understand why in the Vedic age, which Sri Aurobindo speaks of as the symbolic age in human cycle, the study of Shastras, the study of Vedas was limited to a very, very few classes of people who were considered inwardly evolved enough, inwardly mature enough to understand the deeper mysteries of the knowledge. And the majority of people who were still at the infra-rational, physical, vital stage of development were given the outer karma kand, the outer practice. which then evolved or degraded into typal and conventional. So the higher knowledge goes behind the veil, behind the curtain, only to be revealed when the spirit is ready to kind of manifest that new wave. So what you are describing is probably what is happening now. I'm not on Twitter, but I spend a little bit of time on Facebook and Instagram. But of course, I say this is by part of my sociological research, to understand what is going on in the communal mind, if you will. And I observe, but of course my observations are also limited to the people that I interact with. So it's a very biased data, not a random sample as such. But I see a lot of young people seeking beyond what the material trappings have given them so far. The popularity of what we understand as the new age spirituality, the popularity of the various gurus who are sometimes being even critiqued as they have become very commercial, this, that is all part of the outer phenomenon. The underlying reality is that seeking, right? So I don't think we are going in that bad direction, but like I said, as not I said, like Aurobindo explains, these are all confused, chaotic movements on the surface. It's the underneath reality that we have to catch hold of. That's the seeking. And I think not just individually, but even collectively, institutions are changing their own ways of looking at things. Even corporate institutions, they have, spirituality in management is a huge field of study, right? So the 7 Habits of Effective People started probably that revolution. But so many things, Zen. One of my friends wrote a book at least 8-10 years back, Lessons from Ramayana, or Rama as an avatar, as a leader. There is one very good Hindi novel that I read, inspired by Valmiki's Ramayana, and that came out at least, I think, 25 years ago, where Rama as a leader, you can get great insights. His depiction of Rama, this writer is no longer living, but the way he described Rama was as a leader, and you could actually take lessons from there and apply it in any corporate setting. So that seeking has been going on. But to what extent it expresses on the surface, we'll have to wait and watch and see. So, yeah. That's Abhyuday, Narendra Kohli's Abhyuday. It's a 2-volume Ramayana, yeah. It's in Hindi. I think it's been translated into English as well, but yes.
Thank you, Beloo, for sharing Aurobindo's words and your reflections on them. My question, since you also written a book on education and you worked also a lot in that area, so for the children and teenagers and youth who are studying now, and you mentioned social media, the influence that they get through that. So in your reflections, what do you think needs to change on ground at the education level on how we impart education in context to this new evolving social thought of Sri Aurobindo?
Yeah, very good question. In fact, I'll bring it back to human cycle itself, and if I can find that passage, I may just read his words also. And that is where when he describes the movement from individualism to the subjective age, the coming of the subjective age. Education is something he speaks of very specifically. Let me just see if I can find that quickly. Yes. So when the societies evolve from a more individualistic, see here we should also keep in our back of our mind, when he's talking of the age of individualism, he's talking of that material rationalistic individualism, because there can be from an Indian cultural perspective, a more spiritual understanding of individualism. That yes, an individual is not just the ego. Individual is that Atman, the true self, or in Mother's integral yoga terms, the psychic. And the integral education is based on this very idea that it's that true self, the psychic, that has to blossom, that has to come in the full. So this way of looking at education is probably, we can say that it is based on that essential spiritual view of individualism, not the rationalistic individualism. So, but when the societies, collectives move from materialistic, rationalistic individualism to the age of subjectivism. And the reason I brought this example is also because in ancient India, we had this very important, strong awareness in our system of education, which valued the truth of the individual's psychic. That is why, the Swabhava, Swadharma, all these tools were there to understand. Gurus, what Sri Aurobindo describes in his writings on education in ancient times in India, we were not teaching by snippets. Thoda sa ye padhaya, thoda sa wo padhaya, 50 minutes this period, 50 minutes that period. One subject was taken and gone in depth. So this awareness was very much there, even though it was not probably as widespread as it was, as it should have been. But for that, collective has to be ready also. But now when these societies are evolving from individualism to subjective, he says the few areas where you will see the beginning of the subjective age include psychology, education, arts, ethics, these fields. So he says the first tendency, an increasing psychological vitalism. No, this is not the paragraph that I was looking for. Okay, the characteristic note of these tendencies, which is the subjective tendencies, that comes first in how the psychic dealing of man with his own being, with his fellow being, and with the ordering of his individual and social life. So these tendencies, the characteristic note of these tendencies may be seen in the new ideas about the education and upbringing of that child that became strongly current in the pre-war area. So pre-war era. So that means he's writing in 1916. So pre-First World War. Even before the First World War, these ideas had started taking hold of some of the small sections in the humanity. That, and then Sri Aurobindo describes that earlier child used to be considered as the property of the father, or wife used to be considered as property of the husband. All these ideas have been thrown into dustbin, right? Each child has to be allowed that freedom to evolve and to come to his or her truth of the being. So the fact that these ideas are taking hold of the humanity, even in the pre-war era, this is also the time where some of these so-called reform movements were going on in India as well, under the influence of the Western knowledge, starting from Ram Mohan Roy or Ishwarchan Vidyasagar or many other, in women's education, girls' education. We may criticize them today that, oh, they were not necessarily true to the Indian, this or that, but they served their own purpose. They had their own merit, and we have to accept that. So the discovery that education must be a bringing out of the child's own intellectual and moral capacities to their highest possible value and must be based on the psychology of the child nature was a step forward toward a more healthy, because a more subjective system. So a more subjective system of education will naturally be a more healthy system of education, which again has to bring in the element of individual freedom, individual blossoming, understanding the nature of the child, facilitating the child to understand his or her own nature. But this is where subjective still fell short. Sri Aurobindo will not let us go that easy. But it still fell short because it still regarded him as an object to be handled and molded by the teacher, to be educated. That is not correct. But at least there was a glimmering of the realization that each human being is a self-developing soul, and that the business of both parent and teacher is to enable and to help the child to educate himself, to develop his own intellectual, moral, aesthetic, and practical capacities, and to grow freely as an organic being, not to be kneaded and pressured into form like an inert plastic material. You saw the movie Three Idiots, right? When this character of Madhavan comes, when he is born, that scene I cannot forget. I mean, there are very weird things in the movie, but that scene remains. He's born in the cradle, and the father, he is going to be an engineer. You know, just out of the labor room, and he's going to become an engineer. So from that to allowing this, there is still a great improvement. And yet, that is not complete, because then Sri Aurobindo continues, it is not yet realized, this is the future he gives, it is not yet realized, so yes, that it's realized that, you know, a child is a self-growing soul, but it is not yet realized what this soul is, or that the true secret, whether with child or man, is to help him to find his deeper self, the real psychic entity within. That if we ever give it a chance to come forward, if the psychic is given a chance to come forward, and still more, if we call it into the foreground as the leader of the march set out in front, what the Upanishads say as the mind as the leader in front, you know, mana prana sharir neta, if the psychic is given the chance to become the leader in the front, it will itself take up most of the business of education out of our hands and develop the capacity of the psychological being towards the realization of the potentialities of which our present mechanical view of life and man and external routine methods of dealing with them prevent us. So, if the psychic is given a chance to be the leader, we won't even need schools. You know, that is why Ivan Illich is deschooling the society, right? So the movements that we see today, homeschooling, deschooling, unschooling, whatever we want to call it, there are groups of people doing all these. It's a movement in the right direction. Small, chaotic, confused, but it has started with the individual. One mother pulling out a child from a school. And today we have that Swa Shikshan whole organization like that, right? So this is the future. So there is that anarchic element that is part of this process, right? So we can, I mean, this is what I think really Sri Aurobindo's social philosophy, why it is so important, that it helps us get this understanding to look beneath the outer phenomena and to look at, but for that we need to have an understanding first of what is the truth of which society is an expression. So we cannot get rid of the secret knowledge or the psychological understanding of the being or the discerning intellect and the, you know, all the other lessons from the Gita. Without that, we cannot walk this path. So I don't know how deliberate it was, but the sequence is really flowing very nicely. So, thank you.
So hope you all had very nice, interesting topic. Of course, I enjoyed a lot. She cleared out many things what was pondering in my mind so far. So let me start. Like as she said, she was in the West for quite some time, not for many years, I think so. We can see how we can come to that in a very simple way. I correlate with a simple way. There used to be a transplanting the house in USA. You must have seen that. Once, like, they used to take the house and they go to the next place and they plunge into the ground.
Mobile homes.
Mobile homes, and even the static ones, they remove it.
Yes. That
so
also.
easily they remove it and they'll put it in another place. So she says we move from place to place for evolve. It's an opportunity given for us. When we move, we grow. It is seen in the life of Sri Aurobindo, how he was traveling from a small boy. He was here and thrown out to England to pursue, because he is the future avatar. He has to show to the world how we can combine together, East and West together. We have to grow together. That is the idea that he took, and mother took birth in France, and he took the education in England. So this combination, it is already, they showed in their life. And ma'am beautifully said how the family, nation, humanity, the fourth stride, superhumanity. Of course, superhumanity is the aim and ideal of integral yoga. And I want to put a little bit significance over that, the superhumanity race, fourth stride. Mother once said she has shared her experience in Agenda, as we all know. All the recordings are there in Agenda, her personal experiences with people and ashram sadhaks and Mother Sri Aurobindo. Whenever Sri Aurobindo speaks, the words hit the floor, and those words will get supramentalized. Such a powerful person, our master. So the fourth stride, the superhumanity, he already achieved, and he already lived in that. And he has shown the way for us. It's not so tough and easy. So ma'am beautifully explained that these four, family, nation, humanity, we are living. It's not something alien to us. Already we are living in that group, individual, collective, and everything is going with the society. And also we are developing on our own. So we are towards that superhumanity level already. So happy that you all here, we are part of superhumanity. And thank you, ma'am. Beautiful, beautiful. I am very happy. In spite of your timing and your dedication, commitment, you are here with us.
It's my pleasure. It's really a blessing to be able to share whatever little we have.
Can give applause to her. One second. We very much we want, of course, everybody, but divine Shakti is divine feminine is very important for Sri Aurobindo. Yes. So we want her, Malaji, and everybody all, please join. So very happy to have Malaji and Beloo ji taking integral yoga. Devasmita ji, please, you are the future. Come on, please. Please welcome. Yes. Beloo ji. Yeah, we have a movie.
Yes. Yes,
it's about Sri Aurobindo. It's transformation of Sri Aurobindo.
Yeah, it's about the 1 year during which time he was in the jail, Alipur jail. Yes. So the movie is called, it's a documentary called The Transformation. So it's
please
54
do
minutes
come,
long.
and our Aurobindo radio live streaming is going on. Thanks for the viewers, and please join if you are in Aurobindo. Yes. And thank you so much.
Yes. Okay, thank you.